I would like to introduce John Watkins, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the National Association of Areas of Outstanding Natural Beauty, who's going to tell us about the current picture in respect of AONBs. So welcome, John, and over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bridget. Yeah, I'm not sure. This is more of a warm-up pack rather than top billing, I think, going first. So just very briefly, in terms of what the National Association for AONBs is, just in case you're not aware. It's an organisation. I joined it in July, so I've been here a relatively few months, so I'm still finding my feet and my way around. But the purpose of the association is it's a charitable organisation which is there to promote the conservation and enhancement of natural beauty in and around areas of outstanding natural beauty, other protected areas, and those for which a designation might be pursued, relating to that about advancing education and understanding, and linked to the AONBs themselves to promote the efficiency and effectiveness of those organisations promoting or representing AONBs. So that's just sort of briefly where the association sits. It works in one way, huge generalisation, but I guess it works on behalf of the AONBs, recognising that they are sometimes both geographically and politically distant from some of the central government decision making, which impacts on them both positively and negatively. So trying to make the most of that, and I'll cover that when I'm talking about some of the environment within which we're currently working. Broadly, there's sort of 4 key areas in terms of the external environment which the association is currently engaging with. Firstly, nature recovery and climate change, clearly sort of with COP26 and other nature emergencies being declared, those are sort of critical at the moment. And so we're looking at optimising opportunities for AONB partnerships to help support nature recovery, mitigate climate change impact, and support effective adaptation. So we have an officer who's currently funded by Natural England to try and encourage and support and enable the AONBs to put together the nature recovery plans which were committed to under the Colchester Declaration back in 2019, and to see what opportunities emerge from that, as well as then making the policy links through to the proposed local nature recovery strategies which are coming out of the Environment Bill. Another area which is quite significant at the moment is relating to agriculture, and we will hear later about the Farming and Protected Landscapes programme, but clearly as the whole agricultural support system is redesigned following leaving the European Union, there are huge opportunities there for what that can do in terms of the delivery of AONB purpose, but also clearly then some kind of threats as to how, if like national programmes differentiate and distinguish in protected landscapes. Thirdly is around engagement. You know, one of the key areas, these are national designations, and so to what extent do they reflect the nation? So looking at how we can explore new ways of, if like, sharing natural beauty with a wider and more diverse audience, and this is about maintaining the relevance of AONB to the nation, as well as obviously bringing about sort of more advocates for AONB and what it is they're trying to achieve. And I guess finally, and I'll go into a bit more detail, is around sort of wider reform, both in terms of the public sector dealing with AONBs and within the policy environment. So it's positioning the organisation so that we can support AONB teams and partnerships in the context of implementing recommendations from the Landscapes Review, also known as the Cllr Review. And I'll focus a little bit on that because it's clearly still quite current, albeit it feels like the review has been here for quite some time. It's certainly been dominating my time quite a bit since I joined the association in July. We're still awaiting a formal response to the full review. The Secretary of State in DEFRA published a written ministerial response in the summer, which arguably is in part was a holding response, but also introduced a commitment to look at 2 new candidate AONBs, as well as an extension to a couple of AONBs. So there was some substance in it, but it was largely teeing up that a substantive review response to the review would follow in due course. The latest we have on that is that potentially the response will be published mid-December. The commitment in the ministerial statement, and as an ex-civil service, I see the attraction in the commitment, which was this year. Obviously, DEFRA is running out of this year, and hence I think the last gasp is that they're looking at perhaps mid-December for a full-on response. Having said that, we are quite engaged with DEFRA in terms of providing our thinking from the National Association and from a group of lead officers that attend a so-called contact group with me, which has been meeting weekly for the past few months. This is where DEFRA put forward their proposals as to their thinking as to how they might respond to a particular proposal from the landscapes review. And we have the opportunity to input and advise on that. The officials there, I should say, have been very open and transparent in terms of the conversations that they're having with us, but they expect us to keep those discussions in confidence, which is very challenging, clearly, for an association which is built on wanting to represent the views of all AONBs, as well as the sort of open and collaborative nature that we have as a family of protected landscapes. The officials there, and I think why there is a bit of a delay in getting the response out there, kind of navigating the uncertainties of ministerial preferences, a comprehensive spending review, the need for potentially securing a slot on a legislative timetable. And you may have heard that one of the key recommendations that was in the landscapes review was around the creation of a national landscape service. I think initially government was potentially keen on whether that could be a new arm's length body, but over the last couple of months, that kind of proposal has been taken off the table for the time being, and the preference at the moment is to look at how they strengthen the tripartite agreement that we have as an association with Natural England and National Parks England, and whether some of the functional benefits that they could see in a national landscape service could be delivered through a collaborative approach. The way that we as an association, and as I say, with the lead officers that attend the contact group with me, are kind of pitching our position is around proposal 24 of what was in the landscapes review. And this is where the Cllr panel, if you like, consolidated their view on AONB into a single proposal, whilst recognising it links out to the wider recommendations. And proposal 24 was about AONBs being strengthened with new purposes, powers and resources, and renamed national landscapes. So within that, what's currently on the table in terms of the discussion around the review are proposals potentially for new purposes for AONBs around nature, both nature, strengthening the nature recovery aspects of the natural beauty purpose, as well as maybe adding a second purpose to reflect the fact that AONBs host as more visitors than the national parks combined and are extremely popular, but there is no currently a recognition in the purposes about that management of people. Potential new powers, both relating to planning and to the management plans. New governance approach, which is to look at maybe putting something in place which maintains that sort of dynamic nature of how governance is agreed locally now, but to put something of some degree of consistency and robustness to it. And also there's a recognition of the need for greater resources. Obviously, the other thing in relation to proposal 24 is that they are renamed as national landscapes. And our view as an association is that packaged together there, this is an investable proposition for AONB. Bridget already made reference to the work that the lead officers and very small teams put in to make a huge amount of delivery out of very little resources, and resources that are often uncertain. So what we're suggesting is that by pulling together some of the proposals that are on the table around a package, which may well be Proposal 24, this has the potential to deliver something which is very transformational for AONBs in terms of leadership and management, and is deliverable in this Parliament. In relation to the national landscapes renaming, we've had discussions with DEFRA to say you can't simply just put that out there without backing it up. So they have provided the National Association with some funding to have sort of quite high level but quite broad conversations with key stakeholders across underrepresented groups, business, landowning, etc., to see what the consequences of a renaming might be, and also so that it is more meaningful than simply a new badge. What are the values and behaviours that would need to underpin any such change? This isn't because there is a decision to make that change. It's just to say, well, if you're thinking of there might be merit in shifting to a different name, don't replace one perceived set of problems with another. So we're having these kind of conversations at the moment, and hopefully we'll pull together some conclusions which we'll hand over to DEFRA, which they can consider alongside any consultation they may wish to have as part of the response. I've mentioned resourcing, and I think this is critical. The review was unequivocal that on the ground the majority of AONBs are indistinguishable from national parks. Their total area is 50% greater than that of the parks. They contain just as much important nature, and as I say, even more popular with visitors. As Bridget mentioned, they do vital work for nature, promoting understanding and enjoyment to these places, and are supportive of their local economy. But all of this is currently happening without the recognition in law or the support and resources. The total core funding from government for all 34 AONB partnerships in England now stands at the equivalent of only half the core funding provided to a single park authority. So this resourcing disparity between AONB partnerships and national park authorities is the single most important issue underpinning the future success of the protected landscapes network. We are not for 1 minute suggesting that an inadequate cake needs to be cut differently. There needs to be a particular and focus on accelerating the resolution of the current core funding underfunding of AONBs. So we've shared a proposal with DEFRA on how Cllr's immediate fix for AONB core funding could be delivered in this Parliament for a relatively small sum of money, and this is what we're currently advocating. Hopefully that's just a very quick run through from me of some of the areas that the association is doing, what some of the issues, and an update on what's the latest thing on the Cllr review. And I'm happy to sort of have a look to see if there are any questions in the chat and address that.
I think there was only one question, and it was from me.
Okay. Great.
And it was about new planning powers. What sort of powers are being proposed for AONBs? I think there was talk about them having the same sort of powers as national parks, or not?
Yeah, I think at the moment we're pressing DEFRA to have conversations with the Secretary of State responsible for planning, which happens to be Michael Gove at the moment, who was also the Secretary of State who launched the Landscapes Review. So we're hopeful that if ministers get together and have a conversation, something will emerge from that. The kind of things that are on the table, and there's nothing specific because at the moment DEFRA are saying we can only go so far until we've got the agreement of the other department. So there are a range of things from the statutory consultee in relation to planning applications through to what that means in relation to the status of the management plan, as well as then the duty of regard that public bodies and statutory undertakers have with regard to the purposes of AONB. So there's a bit of a mix on the table. What we are trying to secure an agreement to is that there's a recognition of a need, that there is a commitment to give a clear and statutory role to AONBs in the planning process. We'll then need to discuss the pros and cons of the detail, because I think there are differences of views even within the AONB family as to the extent that needs to go. There's also then a question mark that if you start going down that line, that might trigger some of these recommendations, hence for suggesting they need to be a package link to each other. So there's a question then over the governance arrangements, depending on the degree of, say, you would provide AONB within the planning process, would dictate the degree to which you would need to shift the governance onto a particular model. You know, often you get the idea of a democratic deficit or something if somebody has a specific say in planning decisions. So how would that need to be addressed? So I think, to summarise, we're trying to get a headline commitment that there's a recognition of a strengthening role for planning, with a commitment then to work up precisely what the detail is and what would be meaningful.
Lovely, thank you. There is another question. Do we have time, Mel? You're on mute, can't hear you.
Yes, we do, just about.
Okay, there's one from Fiona Fife, who says,
Okay.
How will the new look AONBs differ from national parks in the future?
I think if we were to tie some of those proposals together, I think you're still looking at a difference, you know, and particularly if what we're not suggesting is that you don't necessarily, it's difficult to put this without necessarily being inferred that I'm being critical of national parks. That's not, it's not the case that I'm intend that. But what we'd want to do is to look at focusing around, you know, what is fit for purpose for AONBs. You know, the board structure within the national parks, for example, is potentially not one where we'd want to go down, particularly given how much resource that takes up. But then again, it depends where we land in terms of planning structures. So we'd still want to try and retain what is, you know, the dynamic nature of AONBs, their willingness to work collaboratively and in partnership, and to leverage as much of that power to convene that they have within an area, rather than necessarily being quite a large organisation in themselves. So what we're suggesting is that we look towards what is fit for purpose for AONB, and design from there, and potentially looking at things like the IUCN's green list of protected areas as a kind of global best practice, if you like, as to what protected area management should look like, and design in from there towards, you know, this is what a new look AONB would be like. The difference for the national parks is where we would end up, and you'd compare once we'd got to the end of the journey. But rather than necessarily looking at how could we be more like a national park, it's what's actually required of this area, and that may mean we look more like a national park authority in the future, and may not. But it's designing what's fit for purpose for AONB.
Okay, that's lovely. Thank you, John. I think it was going to be very interesting to see what comes out of the final review when we see that hopefully in December. Maybe they mean the end of the financial year.
Yes, who knows?
Yeah, I think that, as I said, there's an awful lot to look forward to. And we hope maybe we'll hear more about it within the next year. And hopefully if we have another our annual forum next year, we'll have you back to hear more about it.
Hopefully there will be some significant progress then.
Yes, I hope so. All right, that's lovely. Thank you very much, John.
Thank you.
I think now in Linda's absence, I'm going to move on, and I'm handing over to Richard Burden, who's going to kick off a general update and roundup of the team's work over the past couple of COVID years. So Richard is the Principal Landscape Planning Advisor, and he's going to give you a brief overview of AONB work and planning. Richard.
Thank you, Bridget. Good morning, everybody. Linda is terribly apologetic that she can't be with you, but it's just one of those things. And we're all, as a team, rather apologetic that we're having to do this rather impersonally, and that the day is, or the morning is really just presentations rather than the usual interactions where we all talk with one another over coffee and lunch and everything else. Nevertheless, it's quite some time since we all met, and the main thing to come forward has been the updated management plan, 2019 to 2024. And this really sets out the policies of the partner authorities, and it's a material matter in planning, which I'll come to later. So that's a pretty important document, and it's a statutory requirement, having gone across the desk as the Secretary of State. So it has some weight. But as we all know, things have been turned upside down for the last 18 months, nearly 2 years now. And so the things that we'd hoped to do, often they haven't happened because of limited site visits, working from home. The delivery plan, which we were progressing in an innovative way, has been turned on its head. So the positive side is that we've got the things that Ffinlo is going to be talking about and Tracy is going to be talking about later. Farming and protected landscapes, that's going to make a big change to the delivery plan. So perhaps we can say, just as well, we didn't actually formalise one because we've got this new, big, exciting task ahead of us. The other really good news, which I'm sure many of you will have heard about, is that we were the 14th International Dark Sky Reserve in the world. That came through in October 19, and that's been something that we've been working on for many years, and it's great to achieve that. There have been some changes in the team and the board. Nick, our chairman, has had to stand down for personal reasons. And again, largely because of the COVID situation, we've been unable to do a full recruitment process. And the board itself has had a number of changes, not least because of elections and different councillors on the board. But as I've hinted, there are exciting things ahead through farming and protected landscapes, the environmental approach to farming, the different support systems, and John has already mentioned nature recovery. AONBs are seen as key players in this, and one of the tasks that's on Linda's desk at the moment is getting a full-time nature recovery officer in the team. And again, those of you that were able to come and visit us January last year, it's now this year it seems, we have moved offices. We're up at Rushmore, at Rushmore Farm, Tinkley Bottom, and we have the space there to take on the landscape partnership team. Some of you will have heard about this before, and Johnny will be giving us a full report on this later, so I won't steal any of his thunder, but suffice to say that's a 5-year project with lots of money from the National Lottery Heritage Fund to do super things in the Chalke Valley and Cranborne Chase. We're also keeping our eyes and ears open for a countryside centre, something that's been an ambition for many years. And in this 40th anniversary year, we're organising 40 events, activities, walks, trails. So really, there's been quite a lot happening behind the scenes that's been clouded really by the pandemic. Our thanks, of course, go to DEFRA, who provide 75% of the funding for AONBs. To quote somebody else, not a lot of people realise that. And it is important that folks realise that we have a situation where we have the local management of a national resource with 75% provided nationally. So AONBs are good value for the local community, with only 25% coming from the authorities locally. We are nevertheless grateful that all authorities do chip in and work hard towards that. So that's the sort of encapsulation of where we are, where we've got to, where we've been. And as you'll have seen from the programme, the rest of the morning is team report, questions at the end of the team report, and then Ffinlo Costain we'll be talking about soil and national security, part of the environmental friendly farming approach and all that goes with it. So that's really all from the Linda update. Thank you. I now change my hat and become me and go into the landscapes and planning element. And the most frequent phone call I get is, why did the AONB allow that? The thing is, the AONB isn't in an allowing role. We're not like national parks. We are not the local planning authority. We deal with 7 local planning authorities, and they are the decision makers. Nevertheless, because the AONB management plan is a material planning consideration, and statutorily the AONB management plan comprises the policies of those local authorities for the AONB views carry considerable weight. So there are really 3 elements to my work. There's the consultations on the planning policy side, consultations on planning applications, and proactive planning and landscape issues. So if we move to the planning policy side of things, there's the working with John and colleagues in other AONBs to influence national planning policy framework, national planning policy guidance. Over the last 2 or 3 years, we've had numerous tweaks, adjustments to the NPPF, and keeping up to date with that and helping our planning colleagues by pointing out the changes that are relevant to AONBs is a significant aspect of my work. National planning policy guidance gets down to finer detail, and again, it was July 19 where major changes were brought forward on this, and things of particular note in relation to this is stressing the parallel nature of the landscapes of national parks and AONBs, so that we're not the sort of second cousins or anything, we're all up there together. And the setting of AONBs, the issues associated with those developments just outside an AONB or national park. We've also had some alarms that have taken up quite a lot of time and have been, frankly, a bit of a distraction. And this was the previous Secretary of State changing the planning system and design codes. And it's interesting to note that the thousands of responses that went back led to a rethink, and we now have a new Secretary of State. So hopefully, given that he was involved with the 25-year environmental plan, he will be looking more environmentally rather than just in the sort of how do we get our towns better. And that does seem to be one thing that we come up against, is that perhaps those that make the decisions are not really up to speed on the countryside issues when it comes to planning. They're great on what do we do about houses in the towns, but perhaps not so much on the ball when it comes to the countryside. And at a local level, we've had both the Wiltshire local plan and Dorset local plan consultations. And again, that's been arguing the case for the conserve and enhance. That's the purposes of designation of AONB, conserving and enhancing natural beauty. And so we put it back to our support authorities and say, okay, are your planning policies doing that? And when we move to the more refined level of neighbourhood plans, that's when we get to the stage of saying, well, how can we help our parishes and communities in coming together and getting that finer detail? And I've put 5 up there on the board that have been involved over the last year or two. And it does provide an opportunity not just to emphasize the local materials, the local characteristics of design, but also to bring in dark night sky policies that and pick up other issues from the AONB management plan. And it is quite time consuming for the local community. And it is more than ironic to say that government views these neighbourhood plans as not carrying much weight after 2 years that they've been in place. And we have one of our parish teams, Pimpin, who are particularly concerned about this, and having spent 4 or 5 years getting their neighbourhood plan in place, 2 years on from that, they're now reviewing it because they fear that the weight that it should be carrying won't be carried because of those high-level government statements. We've also had quite a lot of activity in connection with housing around the edges of the AONB and in connection with strategic allocations in neighbourhood plans. Nevertheless, some bright lights on the horizon with the Wiltshire Council Blue and Green Infrastructure Plan. And again, this is the greening in planning policy terms of the sort of things that we all look forward to seeing in our AONB management plan. The other aspect is the planning applications. And to give you an indication of scale, we've had over 200 this year. I've touched on the substantial housing around the edges of the AONB. And of course, all of these extra people will lead to pressures on the AONB, and the AONB team are seeking compensation as part of the process to offset the potential pressures. A lot of the planning applications involve avoiding light pollution and getting better lighting, and that links to the work that Steve's going to be telling you about in a few minutes. We have a major waste management centre being proposed, and whilst the board has taken an in principle view that this isn't the place to do this sort of thing in an AONB, nevertheless they've also said, well, okay, if it's got to go ahead, it's got to be the least intrusive, and that's what I'm striving to achieve with the team that are putting forward that proposal. So moving forward to the proactive work, people come down to enjoy AONBs, and pressures on farmers mean that they seek to diversify. And with the changes that the government made last year because of COVID, we had quite a lot of pop-up campsites. It was extended from 28 days permitted development to 56, and a number of residents and parishes, particularly in the proximity of the New Forest, where there seemed to be an overspill effect, had significant issues. And we note that the New Forest is seeking to achieve an Article 4 direction, which effectively means that people have to apply for planning permission rather than having this permitted development right. And it will be interesting to hear from the communities what they feel, whether the AONB should seek a similar mechanism to keep camping of a scale that is appropriate to an AONB, perhaps the handful scale rather than the 100 scale. Another aspect that exercises people's minds a lot in this AONB is the number of masts that we find for mobile phones. Everybody wants their mobile phones, their broadband connection and everything. And working with the National Association and colleagues, I'm involved with the Code of Practice review team. We've got a meeting this afternoon to take this forward so that greater emphasis is given to sensitive location where masts are needed, and to the consideration of small cell technology where communities can have, such as in the Chalke Valley, mobile communication without having to get into lots of masts. At the statutory consultee, this is, would AONB and this AONB become a statutory consultee as part of the Cllr review that John was referring to. We already have a planning protocol with our planning authorities, all 7 of them. So we do get consulted, but statutory consultee would mean that we were consulted on everything. And we put in place a piece of work that set out the implications of that. And that's quite something to take on board, and it definitely has resource implications. And the issue at the moment is planting trees. Every television program on the environment says plant trees. And with the landscape character being fundamental to conserving and enhancing natural beauty, we're very keen to make sure that it's the right tree in the right place. So Fiona Fife produced this for us, and it's available on our website. So bearing in mind that lots of simple things may have a downside, we do ask everybody to have a look at this. What I would now suggest is that, seeing time zooming by, that I say thank you very much for listening to me. And relatively new Dark Skies advisor is Steve Tonkin. And so he will tell you what it's like taking forward the Dark Skies initiative. Over to you, Steve. Unmute.
There we go. Okay, just tabbing through to the correct thing there. So you should have my screen up there now. As Richard just said, I'm relatively new to this. I started a year ago, during most of which time we've been on working from home and lockdown and all the rest of it, which has actually made it rather difficult to do a lot of what we should be doing. So I think it's fair to say we are behind on what we're doing. Now, when we got the International Dark Sky Reserve status in 2019, part of that was it's provisional, and it's provisional on us getting the lighting turned down, as it were. And we have a long way to go on that. Let me just work through this one. So, hello, next slide, come on, thank you. But we have been working. So during 2021, for example, we had our February Dark Sky Fest, and we reached more than 1,500 people through that. So that was warming that so many people were interested in it. Some of those, I have to say, though, were from abroad, so it's not all local people. In International Dark Sky Week, we had 2 events, and they attracted 250 attendees. That's mostly local. Tried to be quite active on the media since we so I've been in post, I've given 11 radio interviews, been to youth groups, I've featured on a couple of Stargazers podcasts, and our e-newsletter, which goes to several tens of thousands of people all over the AONB. And the big one this year was we featured as an AONB on Country File, and the Dark Skies part of our work had 6 minutes on that, which is actually quite a long time for one program. So we did help, I managed to get things across. And lastly, we attended the Chalke Valley History Festival, where our Dark Skies exhibition certainly drew attention, and we managed to get the word out to more people there, including, I have to say, to a couple of strolling policemen who I had a bit of a ding-dong at, because they are still advocating dusk to dawn security lighting, or as those of us involved in it tend to call it insecurity lighting. Why would you want to put out a beacon that says there's something worth nicking here, and then providing courtesy lighting for those who might want to not do well? And we were also represented at the End of the Road Festival at the Lammetry Gardens, which I have to say, End of the Road Festival does not have the best lighting in the world. It's the festoon lighting, which is one of the things that features in these pop-up campsites that Richard mentioned. So that was us at Country Fire. We've also started our dark sky custodians training, and this is something it's we're doing in coordination with the Landscape Partnership Scheme. And the idea of dark sky custodians, these are people who are taking on this work locally as volunteers in their local village or parish, and we help them see what it is they need to do and why they're doing it, and it will tie in with our Dark Skies Charter, which I will come to in a moment. Part of the Dark Sky Charter also involves accreditation, and we are getting an increasing number of applications for dark sky accreditation from villages, parishes, businesses, farms. And the idea of this is, as people improve their lighting, we have 3 tiers of accreditation up to 5-star. We have actually given dark sky accreditation to Tisbury railway station, the only railway station in the AONB, and that is on account of its lighting is now all full cutoff or fully shielded, which means that it all goes downwards. It doesn't have any light going directly into the sky, which is of course a good thing, and it's part of what we need to be doing. We have scheduled 5 stargazing events this year from August to December, and we are having a lot more sorted out for next year, and we are also repeating our online Dark Skies Festival in February 2022. And our dark sky events, I think, have been very popular. This is one that we held at Broadchalk earlier in the year to coincide with the Perseid meteor showers. So I would say if anybody in the AONB would like to host a stargazing evening, we will support you the whole way on that. And we have a team of local astronomers from the Wessex Astronomical Society and Fordingwood astronomers who come and support these things as well. As I said, the thing that has been one of our major pushes this year is to get our Dark Sky Charter on the road and implemented. And what this is a way of trying to get through to people the necessity of doing something about their lighting. I'll just go through the bullet points there quickly. So the first one, shielding the lights. So we are reducing the sky glow and the effects of artificial light at night on flying fauna. This is the sort of thing we're up against. This is a light in a car park. You can see by the date on the bottom, the time I took it. The car park is not used after 4 o'clock in the evening. And we were alerted to this by a local man who goes for a walk, and he says, since I put that light in, he hasn't heard any owls. And you can see why. If you look behind it to the right, the light is actually illuminating the trees, apart from the fact that it's far too bright for the intended purpose, and it really does not need to be on all night. So this is the sort of thing we're trying to get people to do something about. One of the issues is that there is no law really against light pollution. Some of us think that, if things like bad lighting and carbon dioxide smelt like sewage, people wouldn't hesitate about doing something about it. Fortunately, they don't. So this is part of our scheme, is to try to get the right light, right place, right time. This is next thing, shielding light so they don't shine off the property. So we reduce light pollution and glare. Frankly, it's dangerous. This is you can see in the top part there. What we have are these bulkhead lights here. Now they look perfectly innocuous during the day, but this is what they're like at night. So this is potentially dazzling drivers. And really, all it takes is a little bit of sensitive shielding, and those can be brought down and be made compatible. Using lights of a coordinated color temperature of less than 2700 K. What that is, it's really what we call warm white light, and the blue end of the spectrum light, as we can see here, scatters enormously. It also, these are lights basically next to each other, and you can see that all the insects are attracted to the blue light, or the bright white light, the cold white light, whereas very few to the warm white light. And this is now being implicated in what some people are calling the insectageddon. If you don't have insects, you have a big problem. And some recent research has shown that if you put fruit flies under blue light for 24 hours, they die. It is really as simple as that. Moving on. We want to have exterior lights on motion sensors, because what that will do is reduce their effect on all aspects of the nighttime environment, and particularly reduce the amount of sky glow. This is Knowlton Church, and you can see the sky glow in the background there is mostly really unnecessary. There's no need to have light going up into the sky all night. We want to use lights with the minimum brightness necessary for their task. And this is a really big problem. There are national standards, the British standards on lighting, and people think, well, that if I do that, that's the minimum. Yes, it is the minimum, but it's minimum and it's effective. But more light will be better. And I just want to show you a couple of things which really illustrate the point that more light is not better. So first of all, we have, watch this person here as they walk along the road. Disappeared. And this is a case, it's an illustration of what's called luminance veiling, and bad light over bright light causes this. And frankly, it's a potential safety hazard. The other thing is, if you reduce the amount of light, sometimes conversely, you get more visibility. So this is some chalets that were lit up, not particularly bright lights beforehand, but when they reduced the lighting, see how much more is visible, even though the actual amount of light has reduced. So we're trying to persuade people that really more light is not necessarily the right thing. And then moving on from that, what we are doing is, with the Dark Sky Accreditation Scheme, is trying to help people implement these by improving their own lighting, and also this raising the awareness of the International Dark Sky Reserve generally. When we did the broad chalk stargazing event, one of the things that became very clear is that a lot of people who live in the International Dark Sky Reserve are unaware that they live in an International Dark Sky Reserve. And this is obviously some work, much more work that we have to do on this. So we are writing articles for parish magazines and all the rest of it, hoping to engage people on this. It's ongoing work, and I have to say it's very enjoyable work most of the time, but we are up against people who take the attitude, well, there's light going up anyway, so what difference does a little bit more make? No, there's light going up anyway. That's not a good thing. We don't want to add to it. We want to get rid of it. So that's my for now, and I'll take any questions when we come to the end of these presentations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. Clearly, there's a huge amount to be covered in the detail in achieving really good lighting that isn't polluting and isn't causing problems to human and wildlife health. And as you can gather, once you set Steve going, he will go on and on for ages. So there's lots of stuff, and I'm sure he'll be very pleased to talk to community groups on this. However, something that's equally interesting and with lots of projects is the Chase and Chalke. And Jonathan Monteith will give you a really glamorous, colourful slideshow now as to what all the things that have been going on there. And we've got a really enthusiastic team out and about, trying to do things from the physical on the ground to the aesthetic and cultural. So, Johnny, over to you.
Thank you, Richard. What an introduction. So if I can live up to that. So by Richard's laughter, I assume everybody can hear me. That's always the first standard question of these presentations. So let me just get my presentation up. Okay. Morning, everyone. I'm Johnny Monteith. I'm the scheme manager of the Cranborne Chase and Chalke Valley Landscape Partnership Scheme. I'm going to do something which I don't normally do, which is I'm going to read some notes, basically, so that I can get through everything I want to say and not ramble too much and go off topic. So I'm hoping that you can follow me through this. Obviously, because we've not had an annual forum over the last couple of years, I want to give a bit of an introduction about what landscape partnership schemes are, what the Chase and Chalke landscape partnership scheme is hoping to do, and talk a little bit about the area of Cranborne Chase and Chalke Valley itself, before going into a little bit of detail about some of the initiatives that we've been able to get off the ground in the last 18 months. I won't be able to go into an awful lot of detail with the time, but I want to give you a snapshot of what we've been doing, what we've been achieving, and how we've been working with our local communities to run through our projects. So just as a bit of an introduction, the Chase and Chalke Landscape Partnership is a group of organisations working together to protect and enhance the special landscape of Cranborne Chase and Chalke Valley, with the Cranborne Chase AONB as the lead partner, and with support from the National Lottery Heritage Fund. As Richard said, this is a 5-year partnership working with local communities to better connect people with the landscape. In 2019, the Landscape Partnership was awarded £1.68 million grant from the National Lottery Heritage Fund, and with match funding then from other partners, the 5-year scheme totals £2.7 million. Working together, our aim is to deliver 20 projects which focus across the Cranborne Chase and Chalke Valley area, providing benefits to individuals, communities, heritage, and the landscape. The area itself, you can see on the map there, and also in relation to the overall AONB area, comprises 254 square kilometres. It's a dramatic and distinctive historic chalk landscape with precious habitats, protected species, amazing views and stunning vistas below dramatic skies, containing the secrets of thousands of years of human occupation. Over centuries, the ancient and historic landscape has been celebrated by artists and archaeologists, scholars and writers. The area offers fantastic opportunities for recreation, anything from walking to cycling, horse riding, river dipping, stargazing, as Steve touched on, and is a source of inspiration and does provide a real deep sense of place. The Landscape Partnership Scheme includes the area of the medieval Royal Hunting Ground of Cranborne Chase and the river valley to the north, which is the Chalke Valley. There have always been historical, natural, and social links between these two areas, and our aim is to explore and reinforce these links by better connecting our communities to this amazing area. The projects focus or offer opportunities for free training and include a broad range of activities and opportunities which we hope will encourage individuals, communities and new audiences to help conserve, enhance, understand and learn more about this unique heritage, and really to become the beating heart of the scheme. The area itself, as you can see on the map, is bounded on the western and northern sides by steep chalk escarpments. To the southern limit then is the A354, with a small extension to include the prehistoric landscape of national importance, including the Dorset Curses, and to include Martin Down National Nature Reserve, which itself represents the second largest area of uninterrupted chalk downland in Britain. The area itself is a deeply rural area, as many of you will know, sparsely populated, around 11,000 people in that area. However, a further approximately 60,000 people live in the adjacent market towns, and just under 500,000 people then live within the 1 hour's drive, the conurbation of Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole. The area itself covers 30, or parts of, all are part of 30 more modern parishes, with some of the larger villages including Sixpenny Handley, Broad Chalke and Coombe. The vision of the partnership there, as you can see there, is to create a healthier and better functioning landscape for people, for wildlife, nationally recognised for its beauty and extraordinary historic links to the past, and a place where everyone can make true connection with the environment, a living landscape where opportunities exist for present and future generations to appreciate and enjoy nature and heritage. And when we talk about it, we think about a landscape that is better connected, better understood and better managed. The aims of the partnership scheme are to conserve, enhance and restore key features of natural, historic and cultural heritage, to offer opportunities to volunteers to develop awareness and understanding and enjoyment, together with knowledge, skills and volunteering to provide a longer lasting legacy for the future. Our aim is also to provide opportunities for individuals and communities near and far, young and old, to care for the local heritage and to foster that pride in this unique and rich heritage of this landscape. And all of this work, I should say, is only possible because of the millions of people who play the National Lottery every week. So for us, the Chase and Chalke Landscape Partnership is all about people. The scheme is a partnership between Cranborne Chase AONB, our partners and all of our local communities. A partnership that promotes engagement in the landscape through our diverse range of projects, providing opportunities for people to get involved and really to participate in volunteering and the free training and create a catalyst for further learning and enjoyment, and a decades-long legacy supporting the future of this fantastic landscape. We have defined 3 themes which run through the scheme: natural landscape, historic landscape, and cultural landscape. Each, as I say, with a diverse range of projects to help build stronger connections with the landscape and with each other. The natural landscape projects focus on providing training opportunities and, for example, free forest school activities through the Wonderful Woodlands project, supporting local landowners and communities and volunteers to protect and enhance the health of the River Ebble, for example, creating a new wave of biological recorders who will help us to identify and record, promote and take action to help wildlife across the area through our Nurturing Nature project. As Steve already touched upon, we're also training new dark sky custodians to provide them with the knowledge and the skills to share their enthusiasm for our dark skies and helping volunteers to deliver their own stargazing evenings in their own communities. And this autumn, as Steve touched upon, we've held events at Compton Abbas. Steve mentioned the Perseid picnic event at Broad Chalke, which was fantastic. And we've just done another event with First Woodcuts, Beavers and Cubs groups in Sixpenny Handley. And we've also got some events coming up in Dameron and Coombe in the coming months. Our delivery partnership on the Crystal Clear Ebble project, which is led by Wessex Rivers Trust, they have delivered over 400 hours of volunteer time, including training in invasive non-native species, watervole surveys, wildlife sightings, and other very cool techniques like fixed point photography And I don't want to mention the C word, but all of this within restrictions and in not really being as able as we would like to be out working with our communities on the ground. And early next year, we're going to be launching our Junior Ranger program, which comes across 2 different projects, where we'll be encouraging young people to work alongside our ranger and volunteers and partners, encouraging people to connect with and enjoy and care for our wild places. The Historic Landscape projects focus on bringing the rich archaeological heritage of the area to life. We've developed the Time Traveller of Cranborne Chase augmented reality app, which I hope some of you have seen and used. And so far, with over 1,000 downloads, it's helping people to visualize what our ancestors got up to in places like Martin Down, where you can meet Romans repairing Buckerley Dyke, experience a Bronze Age warrior galloping towards you on horseback, and you can join our ancestors in a burial ceremony beside the Dorset Cursus, which is probably Britain's largest Neolithic monument. You can also join Thomas Hardy in Shaftesbury and Pitt Rivers and Salisbury Museum. If you're in Sixpenny Handley Church Graveyard, you can meet local smuggler Isaac Gulliver, and much more in places like Wimborne, Blandford, and soon Winklebury Hillfort. Our Heritage Schools Cluster programme is a partnership with Historic England. Through that, over the last 12 months, we've already trained 32 people, educators from 12 different schools, 2 community groups and 1 museum service. So helping them to envisage ways of embedding heritage teaching in their curricula. And we've been able to deliver this training online through Zoom so that the training hasn't been too adversely affected by restrictions. Our aim here over the next 12 months is to train at least another 12 teachers and encourage 24 schools to increase their use of local heritage in their curricula. And some of that we're hoping will be in person, so we can actually go to sites and look at how we can use resources and the fantastic archaeology in the area to promote that teaching. When our Champions of the Past project commences early next year, we'll be asking our hundreds of volunteers to help us analyse the LiDAR data that we've collected and join us in the field to record and ground truth hundreds of new archaeological features that we've discovered together. This will lead to at least 15 sites being in better management and over 30 landowners involved in the project in terms of accessing their land to survey sites and hopefully at some point do some small scale excavation work along with geophysical surveys, field walking and things like that. So we hope to have over 400 volunteers involved in that project over the next 2.5 to 3 years. Much of this year has focused on outreach and promotion at events like the Festival of Archaeology Days in July, as we've had to redesign this project slightly so it has it's less adversely affected by restrictions from you know what. On the cultural landscape side, those projects include a wide variety of ideas and initiatives, from poetry and singing through to storytelling, dressing up as Romans and walking across the landscape to creating enormous silk flags. And it's an impressive group of projects. Earlier this year, we collected 6 hours of audio as part of our Oral Histories Memories Captured project. And that was working with Bournemouth University students to work with local craftspeople in gathering their stories of working and living in the Chase and Chalke area. So we've had charcoal makers, hurdle makers, blacksmiths and other skilled craftspeople alike coming together to tell us their stories. And we'll continue this project through next year in partnership with Blandford Museum, with additional training for adults and young people to become oral historians. Our fantastic route checkers have been walking the many miles of our rights of way network and identifying some of those issues that we can then get our practical conservation volunteers out to make plans then to fix those problems. And so far they've racked up over 150 hours of volunteer time, which is a fantastic achievement. This autumn also saw the launch of our Words in the Landscape project, and some of you may have seen our poetry boxes set up across the landscape, and some of you may even have contributed. So if you have, thank you very much. So far, we have had 54 poems, pieces of creative writing or sketches collected as part of that project, and we'll continue to gather these through next year, and they'll be curated as part of an exhibition towards the end of the scheme. Or early next year, also our commissioned poet will be going into schools to run workshops to create even more pieces of poetry, and working with schools and community groups to expand that project. Our annual walking festival this year included 15 events across 11-day festival, including Chase and Chalke Wild Family Fun Days, which we worked with our partners to deliver at various sites across the Chase and Chalke area. Those designed partly to engage families with younger children to explore the Chase and Chalke area on their doorstep that they may not be familiar with. And we had a total of 283 people join us on the 11-day festival this year, which was amazing. And a big shout out to our volunteers who volunteered their time, both the walk leaders, walk marshals, and others who came along to help on the days. So thank you very much. As part of our Celebration in Silk project, we've been working with schools, 5 schools and 5 community groups to collect their artwork and help to design some amazing flags which represent their relationship with this landscape. So working with Woodcut's Cubs and Scouts, youth group charity Seeds for Success, Coombissa Primary School and Shaftesbury Abbey Primary School, to work with fantastic artist Nicola Davies, and she's produced some beautiful flags that we've been using at some of our events. So if you've seen us out at events during the year, you'll maybe recognize some of the flags that we've had flying. School children have investigated their area local to them and used their inspiration to create their silk flag drawings, which Nicola has then combined into a series of silk flags. And the process is really quite dramatic, and just a little, I hope you can see that of Nicola showing us the process. Children have been to have children design come to events afterwards and see their flag flying, which has been really powerful. And those are some of the flags that we've had flying at some of our events. So looking forward to next year then, I'm not going to mention the C word, but all being well, we have a pretty packed schedule ahead for 2022 with numerous opportunities for volunteering and training, and really too many events and activities to put together on this slide. But needless to say, the projects are for everyone across our community to be involved in. So if you'd like to know more about what we have in store, or would like to get involved or have any questions, do feel free to contact us. Sign up for our e-newsletter where you'll get updates on everything that we're doing. This is just a flavour of what's coming up in 2022. We're always looking for more volunteers to help us with biodiversity surveys, archaeological surveys, and so on. Dark sky custodians, helping with practical hands-on conservation tasks, opportunities like the Heritage Schools Cluster project for teachers and educators, and launch of our Woodland Skills training program in the new year, for example. As for events, again, we've got lots going on with free forest school sessions for school groups, and homeschoolers in partnership with our partnership there with National Trust at Farmwel Down. Got our Wild Week events coming up in July next year, which are community engagement events, getting people out in the landscape to investigate and see what there is to enjoy. And one other thing to look out for next year are our pop-up events that will be running across the towns in our catchment area from April next year. So that is just so people can come along and find out what we're doing and how they can get involved. So I'd just like to say thank you to all of our volunteers, members of the community that come forward, our community stakeholder group. I hope some of whom are here today to hear all of this. Their input is very worthwhile. the board itself, which has been lending the support all along the way, and of course all of our partners and funders. And all of this work, I should say again, is only possible with millions of people who enjoy playing the National Lottery every week. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Johnny. Amazing, inspiring project, and it just shows what can be achieved in AONBs when resources are made available. So it really is great stuff. Moving on swiftly, because we have a very tight schedule, we go to Tracy Adams, our Farming and Conservation Advisor, and Tracy is looking forward to having a new colleague arrive next week to take on some of the FIPL work that she's found has landed on her plate. So over to you, Tracy.
Thank you, Richard. So, oh, we are still morning. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Tracy Adams. I'm the Farm Conservation Advisor for the AONB, and I've been doing this work since 2009. So I'm very fortunate to work in one of the most beautiful parts of the country with some amazing farmers. Farming is 89% of the AONB land use, so it's incredibly important. And although natural processes have created the topography and geology, it's people that have shaped and created the landscape we know and love today over millennia. And I'm sure you're all aware that agriculture is going through a great change and certainly a lot of uncertainty since we exited the European Union. Farmer support payments, which were originally introduced through the European Common Agricultural Policy, are going to be phased out over the next 7 years, well, actually 6 years. It starts this year, and year on year, farmers will receive less money from the government in order to support their farming activities. This is going to be replaced by public money for public goods, and I'll go on to that in more detail later. So my work currently is well, other than doing farming in protected landscapes, I work with a number of farmers to bring farmers together in farmer clusters or farmer groups. I've been doing this since 2015. The idea behind farmer groups came out of the John Lawton review of 2010, when he was asked to look at how nature could be made more robust in the light of challenges such as climate change, urbanisation, increasing population numbers. The message that came out of that was conservation areas need to be bigger, better and more joined up. And we can no longer just focus on wildlife reserves and triple SIs. We need to spread the net much wider. So the idea was that maybe by bringing farmers together in groups, we can do conservation and environmental work at a landscape scale. The first one of these groups was very close to here in the Marlborough Downs in 2012, and that's really set the template for a very successful means of working across a much larger area than an individual farm holding. With funding originally from Wessex Water, I have worked with the farmer contacts that I made in my previous role as Farmwel and Bird Advisor. And as you can see, we now have a number of groups across the area. Certainly I'm not responsible for all of them. I set up the Chalke Valley Farmer Cluster in 2015 with Simon Smart. I've done some work with the Wiley Valley group, and I also facilitate the Nadder Valley Farmer Group. So if you look at that map, it's a very impressive coverage, and those farmer groups total about 120 individual farmers covering an area of about 35,000 hectares or 135 square miles, which is about over a third of the AONB total land area. And I think probably out of all the AONBs and national parks in the country, we've probably got the highest percentage of farmer groups, although I don't know that for sure, but I'm pretty sure we must be up there. So farmer groups work by bringing farmers together. It's something that is very much a bottom-up approach. Farmers decide what their conservation and environmental priorities are. They generally have a lead farmer who gets together with his neighbours. They employ a facilitator, somebody like myself, and my role as facilitator is to act as a secretary, administrator. I ask the farmers what they want to do, and it's my job to organise it. The way the funding works, it's a variety of models. Certainly in early days, many of these groups were funded through farmer subscription. So the farmers would pay an amount normally based on their area, like £1 per hectare. That would go into a pot to pay somebody like myself to facilitate the group and also pay for any training events. Now, a number of these groups are funded through Countryside Stewardship, which has a fund of money specifically for facilitating farmer clusters, and that's how I'm funded to run the Nadder Valley Farmer Group. We have 28 members. It covers about 4,000 hectares across the Nadder Valley. It's a wide range of farmers, and some of the things that we're working on involve, there's a lot of pastoral farms in that area, and it's a very important area for greater horseshoe bats. So we've had events on dung beetles and improving pasture management, so that the dung beetles are in good numbers because it's the main food group for greater horseshoe bats. We're doing lots of planting of disease-resistant elm trees. Elms are the only food plant of the white letter hair streak butterfly. And obviously during the 70s and 80s, the elm tree was devastated by Dutch elm disease. So with the help of Peter Shallcross, one of our founding members, we are distributing disease-resistant elms throughout our group and neighbouring groups, so we can bring those trees back into the landscape where they are a very important landscape feature. We're also really focusing on soils, making the soils, improving the carbon, organic matter in the soils, making sure the soils stay in the fields so they don't cause diffuse pollution, which is linked to water quality of the Nadder Valley, the Nadder that runs through the middle of the river valley. And also we're doing work to make people better managers of the wildlife habitats that they've got. So we meet a couple of times. We have formal meetings 3 or 4 times a year, and then we have training events once a quarter. The last one we had was on ash dieback, which was very well attended. So it's a really good way of sharing expertise. And although obviously the whole point behind farm groups originally was conservation, I think what I found is that for me, one of the greatest joys I get from it is seeing people getting together in a social environment to learn about be it dung beetles or pollinators or trees, because farming is a very isolated profession, particularly with livestock markets closing, and it's lovely to bring people together. And obviously COVID made that quite difficult, but we did manage to meet online, and now we're back out in the field getting together, which is great. Moving on, as I mentioned earlier, the basic payment scheme that currently funds farmers with support payments is being phased out, and the government's ambition is farming payments are replaced by the Environmental Land Management Scheme. DEFRA was very keen that this new approach to paying farmers for delivering public goods was tested extensively throughout the country. So they put out the offer for organisations and farmers to test different approaches. We had 144 so far across England. There's still some tests taking place. and 12 AONBs took part in that process, all of which were different tests. We were awarded some money in order to test two. There was one particular approach that we were going to look at on behalf of DEFRA, and that was working with a number of farmers to assess the natural capital on their farms. So this is things like woodland cover, biodiversity, soil, organic matter, hedgerows, trying to assess that and measure it, and then putting that into an individual land management plan. So we were testing the process of measuring that natural capital with a farmer and seeing how easy that was. We also did some feedback from farmers on what had and hadn't worked in past conservation schemes, which have been running now for about 30 years. This test ran from January last year to June this year. It was tricky with the pandemic, but the farmers that took part were really helpful, and the consultants we used were brilliant. So the information from that test is available on our website, but I just wanted to show you this map. So this is one of the outputs from that work. So we worked with 6 farmers at different farming systems and different landscape characters across the AONB to get a broad spread. And we measured tree cover, carbon in the soil, and the consultants used a spatial modelling tool to look at these different elements of ecosystem services. So this map here, the red areas are hotspots. So that might be an ancient woodland. Obviously, that's going to store lots of carbon. It's going to be very good for purifying the air of any pollutants. It's going to slow down the flow of water across a landscape. So it means there's less likelihood of flooding downstream. And also it's going to be a biodiversity habitat in its own right. So it's red. The blue areas show areas with the most opportunity that a farmer might get paid for in the future. So this could be some unproductive farmland that could be taken out of arable production. It could be sown to a wildflower meadow or some new woodland if that is appropriate for the landscape character. And then that would provide more ecosystem services that the farmer could then potentially get paid for. So some of the lessons that we learned, there is a dearth of data available out there. There is various data, but it's not everything that we needed. So the consultants had to work very hard in collecting the data on a farm by farm basis, with a lot of help from the farmers. So either that needs amending by the government, or some new means of assessing your natural capital on your farm needs to be put together, so farmers can quickly come together and put that information so they can it can form the basis of future payments. Not surprisingly, the value of natural capital in the AONB is high due to the amount of habitats that we've got. The capacity of farmers vary in terms of their skills at doing any assessments themselves and the time that they have to do it. It's quite a time-consuming process. You know, we had farmers going around and assessing their hedgerows in terms of quality, which is something that our consultants came up with. Obviously, hedgerows store carbon, they're a biodiversity resource in their own right, but how do you measure them? And the farmers had to go out and do that on a hedge by hedge basis. So if you've got a 1,000-hectare farm with lots of hedges, very time consuming. The ability to share that knowledge between farmers and their neighbours, local knowledge in terms of one farmer might be very knowledgeable about the wildlife he has on his farm, more so than his neighbour. And that's where farmer groups are really important, because you've got a ready-made network in order to share that. And there was a big concern, and this hasn't gone away. These payments, which mean a lot of farms are either break even or profitable. And when you take those away, they're not. There's a real concern about how that income loss is going to affect the farming business. And also there's still a lack of knowledge about exactly what farmers are going to get paid for through environmental land management scheme, and what they're going to have to do in order to get those payments. And are those payments going to replace all the money they're losing through BPS? So it's a very difficult time for farmers, which is of a concern, obviously, to the AONB, because they're such an important part of our landscape. On a brighter note, John Watkins mentioned farming in protected landscapes earlier, which is this new pot of money from DEFRA for all national parks and AONBs in England, and it's very exciting. Myself and Linda are running that programme until our new FIPL officer, Helena, starts next week. It's very much a project-based programme. So we're looking for farmers to come up with projects that meet one or more of the 4 criteria. And these criteria are people, so maybe looking at new walking routes in the countryside, nature, new habitat or improved habitat, places, that's landscape, and mitigating climate change. So that might be planting woodland alongside rivers to slow down the flow of water across the land. And this picture here is a turtle dove pond, actually, that was put in the Cranborne Chase area, and this is a sort of project that we would fund. It's a new resource for wildlife. It's enhancing the landscape, and if it was near a right of way, you could put some interpretation there. So that's ticking the people box as well. In terms of the application process, all the information is available on our website. What normally happens is the farmer contacts us and talks through their project idea. We would talk to them in terms of how that meets the 4 DEFRA criteria. We also have our own criteria that's based on our management plan. We would go out and do a site visit and have a look at the site and offer suggestions on how it might be improved. The farmer then completes a relatively simple application form. That goes to a local assessment panel that is made up of around a dozen individuals, including farmers, members of our host authority, Natural England, NFU, CLA, Historic England, Forestry Commission, depending on the nature of that application. All the applications are scored. There's a very tight criteria on how that is scored, and that is a national criteria. If that goes through the scoring process, the farmer gets the go-ahead to start the work. We go out and check the work, and the grant is paid. So it's a 3-year programme, and it finishes at the end of March 2024. So it's worth a lot of money to us, considering what a small budget we normally work under. It's £1 million over 3 years. And out of that, obviously the majority of money is for grants to farmers, but there is an allowance within that to employ a full-time FIPL officer who starts next week. And we've already got our support officer in post, and she will help with the admin of the scheme. Unfortunately, with all these things, we have to do plenty of reporting back to DEFRA, and they will be evaluating the success of this programme across England as the 3 years go by. And if it's successful, there's an expectation that might be something that a funding stream that might be available in the future to protected landscapes for their resident farmers. But 3 years is quite a long time in politics, so we'll have to wait and see. So far, we've had 26 inquiries and 4 applications, and our first local assessment panel meets at the end of this month. So It's really exciting, and I can't wait to see some of the projects happening on the ground to enhance what is already a brilliant area. And I'd just like to thank all the farmers that I work with who are great and have done some amazing things in the sort of 12 years that I've been working in the AONB. And that's me done. Thank you.
Super. Thank you very, very much indeed, Tracy. Exciting times ahead. And perhaps one thing that is different from the previous schemes is that FIPL is about local schemes tailored to the local landscape and local wildlife rather than national prescriptions. And that's where Tracy's experience is going to come in and Helena's experience comes in. So I think it's now time to turn to Mel to see where she is with the chat and questions and how we move forward with Ffinlo. They're ready to go.
I'm going to, we have a few questions in the chat, but I'm going to suggest that we answer those separately. We've got a couple related to planning and some to dark night skies, but we can answer those easily. So we'll get in touch and we'll answer those, because I think we're all waiting to hear from Ffinlo. So I think we should go ahead if Bridget's happy with that approach.
I think it's probably a very good idea. Yeah. We're running slightly behind time. So yes, next item on our agenda is soil and national security. And I'd like to introduce Ffinlo Costain. Ffinlo is the CEO of Farmwel and founder of the Food and Global Security Network. Farmwel has advised the UK government on agricultural sustainability and on the role of ruminant methane. In addition to delivering the Food and Global Security Network, Farmwel is working with global brands to develop practical pathways for agroecological transition. Ffinlo also produces and hosts the Farmgate podcast. So welcome, Ffinlo, and over to you.
Thanks very much indeed. You've introduced me. That's fantastic. I can skip that bit. I'm going to assume that everyone can hear me. If you can't, because I have a sometimes dodgy Wi-Fi connection, if somebody can find a way of waving, that would be fantastic. So yeah, I'm Ffinlo Costain, founder of the Food and Global Security Network. I live in Dorset in Chard Oakford, which means that I'm also involved with the AONB, and I'm one of the people on the local assessment panel that Tracy was just talking about. I'm just going to give you a website so that you can have a look at the work that we do and the recent report that we brought out that I'm going to talk about just a little, and that's www.foodandsecurity.net. And as I say, I would appreciate it if you go and have a look at that. And also, if you get a chance to listen to podcasts, the Farmgate podcast is pretty popular, listened to around the world and can be found on the usual channels. So thank you very much to Linda and to Tracy for inviting me to talk, albeit remotely, about food and global security at this AGM. I'm really sorry that Linda can't be with us, and I wish her well. I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes, so just brace yourselves there, and I'll take any questions towards the end. So we face two concurrent crises in nature, and we hear so much now about global warming, but the threat of ecosystem collapse from biodiversity loss has the potential to be equally devastating. And as with so many aspects of the natural world, these crises are interconnected, and so it's essential that we address them together. And so, as so much of our landscape here and around the world is farmed, it's critical that we reform agriculture urgently in order that our land can be managed regeneratively so that we store additional carbon in our soils to reduce the risks of global heating, so that we can improve our crop, livestock and community resilience to the impacts of disease and extreme weather, and restore the biodiversity of our soils, which is, of course, the very building blocks of nature, so that the food we produce is nutrient dense and that rural livelihoods and economies can be sustained. So I'm just back from COP26, where at last food and food systems are starting to be discussed. We're still a long way from policy convergence, but at the session that I chaired for the EU with the World Bank, IPES Food and the World Economic Forum, while there is still disagreement on the detail, we discovered that before long it may well be possible to agree global goals around integrated action on warming, biodiversity, adaptation and security. So clearly there are already global goals on each of those individually, but we find the need that we need to integrate this action so that we don't get unintended consequences. So the Food and Global Security Network is a project of Farmwel, of which I'm chief exec, and Farmwel advocates for sustainable agricultural land use. And the other partner is FAI Farms, which is a global food system consultancy based in Oxford. This October, we delivered a major report in advance of COP26 called Soil Health, a Security Threat Profile. And the report illustrates the critical importance of soil health through the writings of 22 experts, military minds, NGO leaders, scientists, and practical farmers. And it sets out the security threats posed by declining soil health and demonstrates the remarkable opportunity that soil regeneration provides. Before I talk about the report in more detail, I just want to explain to you why I do what I do. And I'm sure this isn't unique, but it's why I do what I do. Now, those of us working in disciplines linked to the crises we face in nature now fully expect to see around 2 degrees centigrade of global warming by about 2050. And let's think about that for a moment. We're now at just over 1 degree of warming. And as David Attenborough pointed out at the start of COP26, humanity has never had to face more than 1 degree of global average temperature change across the whole of the last 10,000 years. And at just 1 degree centigrade above pre-industrial temperatures, the climate disruption witnessed around the globe just this year in 2021 has been pretty remarkable. And I've collected a few examples for you. There have been over 45,000 wildfires in the USA, which have burned more than 6.4 million acres. Now, Wales is about 5 million acres, which gives you a sense of the scale. And if that wasn't bad enough, there have been 45 million acres on fire in Russia. The UK is about 60 million acres. So again, that gives you a sense of the scale there. In Jiangsu, in China's Henan province, they received 24 inches of rain, a year's worth, in just 4 days in July. You'll probably have seen on TV or in the papers that a swathe of land collapsed in catastrophic flooding in Germany's Rhine district. In Australia, in New South Wales, extreme flooding followed a record-breaking bushfire season that had swept the region the previous year. And then in February, a polar vortex brought freezing weather to Texas, Mississippi, Arkansas, and other southern US states. And meanwhile, drought continues to contribute to the humanitarian crises in Ethiopia, while northern India has been hit by severe cyclones. And in the UK in 2021, we faced extremely heavy rainfall at various different times, not always expected, and flash flooding on a semi-regular basis. And we simply don't know what will happen as temperature rises past 1.2, 1.5, and reaches towards 2 degrees. It's never happened to us before. What we do know is that the weather on which global food and nutritional security depends will be at times unbearably extreme and staggeringly unpredictable. So back to why I'm here and why I do what I do. So my children are 7 and 9. I'm 49. So when my children are my age, it'll be around 2060. And we're expecting 2 degrees by around 2050. So how much will the world have changed by then? Now, very sadly, I believe that we are already too late to stop our planet warming to unprecedented and dangerous levels. And at 2 degrees centigrade of average global temperature rise, there is a broad consensus across climate scientists, military and government advisors, and financial institutions that civilization as we know it today will no longer function. Humanity will still exist, of course, but the way that we live our lives and the processes behind our lives will be very different, and they still have yet to be designed. So 2 degrees seems to be more or less built in at this stage, but I still hold out hope that we will be able to act together in order to avert the even greater crisis of a 3 degree or 4 degree rise by 2100, which, by the way, was considered within the likely scenario in the IPCC's AR6 report into the physical background of climate change, which was released in August. Now, at COP26, governments have stepped up their pledges, which is fantastic, but it's the delivery that's often elusive. And as a government, you've got to bring society along with you. So I don't doubt the commitment of politicians, but I do doubt the capacity at this late stage. It's all very well to make promises, but creating the legal mechanisms and the funding incentives to deliver change, it's difficult. There have been a lot of conversations over the last 10 days about climate finance, because of course, funding the transition, funding the global transition is critical. So 2 degrees is highly likely, despite the global ambition which now exists, because the scale of economic and societal reform required is actually immense. Don't believe anybody that says you can change this just by, making sure that we get energy from renewable sources or get electric cars. It's a lot more complicated than that. Because market democracy as a tool, of course, finds it extremely difficult to deliver rapid and radical change. And because COVID-19 has put nations into enormous debt and greatly reduced financial flexibility. So I'm worried, desperately worried for my children's future, not for some abstract amorphous blob of theoretical humanity, but for my own kids, for the kids that live next door to me here, for the kids that my kids play with and who are important to them. Now, if we only faced one crisis in nature, that would be bad enough, but the collapse in biodiversity is just as serious. And in May 2019, the UN reported that nature is declining globally at rates unprecedented in human history, and the rate of species extinctions is accelerating, with grave impacts on people around the world now likely. A report by the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, nice snappy title there, becomes the acronym IPBES, noted that 3/4 of the land-based environment and about 66% of the marine environment have been significantly altered by human actions. And then in 2017, just before the UN's IPBES report was published, a German study showed a more than 75% decline over just 27 years, half of my lifetime, in total flying insect biomass. The decline in insect populations is emblematic of the reduction in biodiversity more broadly, and even more worryingly, seeing as we're talking about this from within an AONB, the study was carried out in a protected area. And of course, biodiversity loss, the reduction in wild spaces, the crowding together of species that have never before had to live alongside one another is also the root cause of the current COVID-19 pandemic. So what's the point? Well, it's this, that while I think we now must accept some level of change in our society, we can also use these big brains that nature has gifted us to mitigate the worst impacts of global warming, to rapidly regenerate biodiversity, which can be done much more quickly, and to game and prepare for the impacts that we anticipate in order to build resilience into our communities and broader society, and in doing so, secure access to quality nutrition for everyone, and therefore to achieve greater national and global stability, even in the face of ecological breakdown. And why, at 12:15 on an autumn day at the AGM of the Cranborne Chase Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty, am I talking to you about these global challenges? Well, it's because land use is the opportunity, and because all land use is local. There may be global goals when it comes to ecological breakdown now or in the future, but action takes place in this field or that coppice, or in this hedgerow or that heathland, in this pond or on that riverbank, because the way that we farm inside or outside the AONB and the way that we manage our magnificent landscapes has the capacity to arrest and reverse the damage that humankind has wrought on nature. And as we outline in our Soil and Security Report, it is our soil that holds the key to climate change, to biodiversity restoration, and to better quality food production. So let me talk about our report. Global security is maintained by taking steps to mitigate future threats. And now, in addition to traditional state-on-state or intrastate threats, we face non-traditional threats such as ecological breakdown. Now, it's widely accepted that the right to affordable nutrition underpins peace and civil stability. When food is scarce, prices rise, inequality increases, and simmering resentments can turn quickly into conflict or even into war. This leads to migration, trapped and displaced populations, and damage to infrastructure and trade routes. Reservoirs of conflict perpetuate inequity, catalyze anger, and make recruitment easier for terrorist organizations. Ecological breakdown is already affecting food production, but a 2-degree rise in global temperatures will lead to extreme disruption in global food supply chains. Declining soil health is at the nexus of ecological breakdown. Extreme weather events associated with global warming, coupled with the loss of biodiversity and soil structure, could have devastating impacts on harvests around the world, which must lead us to the inexorable conclusion that healthy soil and a balanced ecosystem are critical for food sovereignty and a peaceful society. The restoration of soil health is therefore critical to minimizing and mitigating ecological risk. And this isn't just about poorer nations, but advanced economies too. If our harvests fail today, we can import. But if in the future harvests fail in the UK, at the same time as France, Germany, in the large commodity growing areas such as the USA, or Russia, which fueled the uprising into the Arab Spring, if trade routes are blocked by conflict, then the competition for food will lead to price rises that undermine richer nations and our own society as well. But within the food and global security network, which includes voices from around the world, from the UK, EU, USA, New Zealand, and Australia, we offer a solution. We see agroecology as a low risk and low cost opportunity that can greatly mitigate the security threats associated with poor soil health. But to achieve this land use transformation, there are critical choices that governments need to make, and I'm going to mention 3. Firstly, the old approach to food security based on volume, supply, and calorific intake must rapidly change. The post-Second World War drive to produce food abundantly and cheaply for citizens has led directly to a dangerous reliance on large company decisions, government subsidies, and the widespread use of petrochemicals. This approach has been successful when assessed against its own objectives, but it's had devastating impacts on our environment, on the natural productivity of our farmland, and on the nutritional density of our food. Just to give you an example of that, I read a research paper from the USA the other day that looked at the nutrient density of different carrots, and they've studied other vegetables as well. But with carrots, you found that in a regenerative food system, a carrot from that food system had 200 times the nutritional density of a carrot that was just from a standard commodity crop in a standard monoculture, as a sort of monoculture that we might find across in East Anglia today that goes into the supermarkets. It's an enormous difference. So food security is no longer enough. We now need nutritional and soil security. And inevitably, the cost of some foods will increase as prices begin to accurately reflect the internal and external costs of production. But if our diets adjust accordingly and become healthier and more diverse along the way, then the cost of a meal or a shopping basket may be able to remain more or less the same in real terms, which of course is important. Secondly, while climate change is a tremendous challenge, the perceived duty to maximize carbon emissions reduction in itself presents a new threat. As with the drive for cheap food, it's dangerous to oversimplify land use challenges and opportunities. A strong focus on emissions reduction can lead to additional imbalance in already teetering ecosystems. Specifically, the separation of land use for different activities, particularly in nations like Britain, can be grossly inefficient and lead to increased external costs. For example, intensive Sitka spruce forestry can sequester carbon very rapidly, but greatly reduce biodiversity and exacerbate flood risk by reducing water infiltration. Similarly, large-scale rewilding can reduce employment and undermine rural economies, while not necessarily delivering the intended boost to nature unless they are terribly well managed in the way that farmland tends to be well managed. Meanwhile, the resulting further intensification of livestock agriculture, because you've got tracts of land taken away for forestry or for wilding, that intensification that occurs of livestock agriculture requires industrial scale land use to produce cereal and proteins such as soy, leading to higher chemical and water use and additional land use change, all of which lock us into additional biodiversity loss and increased global temperatures. And thirdly, we need to carbon footprint every farm business. It sounds really straightforward, but we're still not doing it. But we also need to start being honest about the global warming impact of cattle and sheep, because the grazing behavior and heavy impact of ruminants are critical components in agroecological rotations. We need ruminants, we need cattle and sheep in our agricultural systems. And in their recent report into the physical basis of climate change, the IPCC has recognised that GWP 100, which is the standard metric for carbon footprinting, overstates the effect of constant, stable methane emissions by a factor of 3 to 4. In other words, it's wrong, it's inaccurate. And far from being responsible for global warming, as sections of the media would have us believe, the science and the revised metric, GWP star, shows us that a herd of 100 cows today are simply replacing the emissions that were first produced when that herd was established by a previous generation of farmers, maybe 20 years ago, maybe 200 years ago. There was an initial pulse of warming at the time when the herd was established, but there's no additional ongoing warming from that herd. Some of the systems that cattle are kept in are bad for the climate, but not the cattle themselves. And in fact, ruminants in agroecological systems can have a highly positive impact on soil health, carbon drawdown, and farm ecology. In other words, it's the how, not the cow. So governments should require carbon footprinting as a gateway condition for agricultural financial support, but they should also encourage farmers to use the new accurate metric for measuring the global warming potential of their businesses. So to rebalance nature, it's critical that our urgent efforts to combat climate change do not further limit, damage, or destroy the health and functionality of our soil habitats. But much as soil health is at risk from climate change and biodiversity loss, from extractive agriculture and more for less food systems, soil also provides clear and achievable pathways out of crises. By focusing on increasing soil health, we can improve climate change, biodiversity, and nutritional outcomes. Regeneratively managed soils are an incredibly powerful carbon sink. Assessments vary, but there is common agreement that the regeneration of soil health around the world could deliver around 1/3 of the carbon drawdown necessary to mitigate climate change, with no adverse impact on biodiversity. Inevitably, soil and that capacity for carbon drawdown was not part of the negotiations at COP26 and urgently needs to be at COP27 and beyond. And after the ocean, the soil is the Earth's largest carbon store, and in genuinely regenerative systems, the levels of carbon sequestration can easily surpass drawdown rates associated with traditional broadleaf woodland. So if you think of a standard woodland that you might walk through on a public footpath, then the carbon that's being drawn down there is about 1/3 of what's been identified in studies across in the USA in landscapes really not that dissimilar to our own. But it does vary, to be fair, from place to place and field to field, landscape to landscape. And conversely, intensively managed soils lead to erosion, compaction, poor water infiltration, and the loss of soil organic matter, while the degradation from ploughing and the use of toxic agrochemicals and overgrazing all contribute to higher carbon dioxide emissions. I'm just going to talk for another minute or two, and then just to give you warning that we're coming to the end. So good soil management also restores the building blocks of biodiversity and is integral to successful climate adaptation. So adaptation is resilience to the impacts of extreme weather. Biodiverse soils, rich in nutrients and microfauna, retain water in the soil carbon sponge and help to ensure water availability, land resilience, and continued food production, even in times of drought. And by contrast, compaction and poor soil health negatively impact the soil carbon sponge, leading to rapid water loss, flooding, and reduced resilience to long dry periods. The life in the soil, of course, also forms the basis of the food web. Microbes feed on arthropods, which feed small animals, and birds, which feed larger creatures. Without soil, there's no life on Earth. So as we face up to the twin crises of global warming and biodiversity loss, we should think of our farmers as our first responders. The choices that they make will establish a narrative of human success or failure as we move towards the middle of the century. Degraded soils must be regenerated, retrofitted with abundant biodiversity so that carbon and water can be harnessed, stored, and released efficiently and effectively. To conclude then, nature is diverse and interconnected. So our responses to ecological threats and opportunities must also be diverse and interconnected. And across this area of outstanding natural beauty, across the counties of Dorset and Wiltshire, across Britain and around the world, it is farmers, our farmers, producing our food, who are the key to solving our ecological crisis and making sure that my children and the children who are important in your life inherit a future worth having. Thanks for listening. I'll try and answer some questions.
Wow, thank you, Ffinlo. I feel slightly scared, I have to say. But you have had some questions in the chat. One of them is, what can we do as individuals? What's the single biggest thing that we can do as individuals if we don't own a farm that would make a positive difference?
It's extremely difficult, because I think the big changes that need to happen are at government level and at corporate level. But at the same time, as you say, there are things that we can do. Now, I made a point. I've worked with and for various different parties over the course of my life. I've worked very closely with the Conservative government over the course of the last few years. In my past, I was party manager for the Green Party. I've stood as a Labour parliamentary candidate as well. So I've got a whole spectrum here of political experience and interest. I made it really clear at the last election to anybody who wanted to come and knock at my door that the party I would be voting for was the one that prioritised action on the restoration of nature. That was more important to me than anything. So voting, I think, is the first and most important thing. But also beyond that, there are things that we can do, obviously, in terms of trying to reduce the amount of driving that we do, to use public transport wherever we can, which I appreciate is very difficult in Dorset, but also to change where you get your electricity from. There are competitive rates now from people like Ecotricity that provide the electricity for my home, and the gas with some element of biogas, and good energy and things like that. So to me, in terms of that everyday difference, I think probably changing your energy supplier is the biggest. And then obviously there's things like recycling and so on. But I think that energy supplier is the big difference at the moment.
Okay, thank you. That'll be helpful for lots of people, I'm sure. And you've got some questions from Tracy, and she would like to know how you define regenerative agriculture.
Yes, okay. Yes, I wish that I had a minute to quickly go and get my definition to stick on the chat, and maybe I will if there's time at the end while there's some summing up. It is defined, and it is difficult to sum up instantly, because we've got kind of 100 words on this. But essentially, if you are farming and you can demonstrate regeneration, not that you just think it's there. So if you are using metrics such as there's the Alan Savory, I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head, the Savory Institute's metrics for measuring regeneration, but also there are metrics coming through the Global Farm metric that the Sustainable Food Trust has been working on. There are various different things that you can measure, but it's not about measuring one thing. It's not about looking at just worm count or just whether there are new and interesting bird species coming there. It's looking at a range of these different things. And if you can demonstrate that you are improving against water infiltration, against soil carbon, organic matter, by sort of wildlife diversity and a whole range of other things, and you can demonstrate that year-on-year improvement, that is by definition regenerative. But I think you've got to be careful, because we don't want to beat farmers up because they haven't achieved something in a particular year, because they may well be mitigating circumstances which are personal or which are external within nature. So it's about, again, establishing a trend rather than necessarily worrying if something doesn't work that you expected to work in a particular year. So I can send you the specific definition, Tracy, that we have. And the other thing that's within that, in the US, they focus on the environment. For me, and we've been sort of trying to contribute to this building of a definition of regen, within the UK. We should also be including animal health and welfare outcomes and making sure that those improve as well. They do generally by default in regenerative systems, but if we are actually targeting and measuring and monitoring that improvement, then we can make sure that any actions that we're taking do not have a negative effect. And then there's also the social, making sure that there are good jobs that people have, that they're decently paid, that there is time off, that if there's an accident, they're well cared for. So it's a range of different things: environmental, ethical, and social. And of course, when it comes to anything to do with agriculture, it's no good being brilliant environmentally but having a failed business. You've got to be economically sustainable as well. So often it's finding new ways of perhaps opting out of the mainstream and selling direct. And there are so many different networks now for farmers to sell direct or through cooperatives, rather than necessarily just through the major retailers.
Okay, so thank you. So I am going to ask one more question that Tracy has asked, even though we've run slightly over time. If there was one single thing that farmers could do to positively contribute to improving soil and reducing their impact on climate change, what would it be?
First thing, carbon footprint using GWP star, because especially if you have any ruminants within your system as well, that will give you a very clear indication of the impact of the carbon dioxide use and the nitrous oxide production. And those are the places where we need to mitigate those actions. And then when you have an understanding of your footprint, and those who were at the talk that I did on GWP star a year or so ago for the AONB will remember a farm that I talked about in Northumberland that has around 1,000 head of sheep and 1,000-ish acres of mountainside. And when they'd actually assessed their impact using GWP star, it was around the same as an average household with a family of 4 in it. I mean, this wasn't the highest, technically powered of farms, but it was a fairly standard Northumberland farm. And when you realize that, you realize that actually just sticking in, some hedges or managing your water in a different way, that can very rapidly have a really positive impact. And once you've netted off your own impact, at that point, you can then start seeking out organizations that already exist out there that will pay you to offset the carbon of other institutions or individuals. But I think for farmers, it's really important to net off their own carbon footprint first. And that means footprinting using things like the Farm Carbon Toolkit or SRUC's AgriCalc, but then making sure that it's been passed through a GWP star switch or lens.